This is Adrian Hall, and you're watching Sports City with Simon Preston.
This video is brought to you by Andy Gone Nuts. 100% guaranteed fresh coconut water delivered straight to your door. Call 876-309-6128. That's 876-309-6128. Refreshing and affordable. For more information, follow them on Instagram at Andy Gone Nuts. Truly refreshing. And Crumble by Mrs. C. Old English fudge and other delectable sweet treats. Call or WhatsApp 876-586-0471. That's 876-586-0471. Hello everyone, I'm Simon Preston. Welcome back to Sports City. This is where we discuss everything sporting related, and we have a very special guest joining us today. And this is none other than my fellow countryman, Machel St. Patrick Hewitt. How are you doing, Bridget? All is well?
I'm very good, Simon. Happy to be on Sports City, and good to catch up. We haven't seen each other, I guess, or physically spoken properly since the reggae. I was about to say the reggae boys, the Rugby League World Cup when Jamaica were over. So yeah, good to catch up, man.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, you're right. It's amazing how time has just gone by so quickly. October, the Rugby League World Cup, we're over in Hull watching the team create history, scoring the first try. You got a chance to meet a couple of the players, and yeah, it was a fantastic experience and great to see brand Jamaica going from strength to strength in different sporting disciplines. Firstly, Mash, when you bear in mind the summer that lies ahead, cricket, football, athletics, looking forward to what lies ahead?
Most definitely. Listen, it's it's never a quiet month, to be a Jamaican sports fan. There's always something. There's always something going on. There's always Jamaican representation in all aspects of all sports somewhere in the world. But you know me, obviously I'm a massive cricket fan, but I think my standout is I'm obviously looking forward to the Gold Cup and the engagements that the Reggae boys have got coming up, and of course the Reggae girls as well. Later on as well in terms of the warming up and the World Cup that's ahead for them as well.
Absolutely, massive summer that lies ahead for both Reggae boys and girls. As you said, the Gold Cup for the boys. For the girls, they also have the World Cup on their horizon. CAC Games, Pan American Games, quite a massive summer on the horizon for sure. But something else taking place in June, and that will be the Cricket World Cup qualifiers in Zimbabwe. Before we get into the gist of things, Mash, I just wanted to get a bit of insight from you. When you heard the announcement last week regarding Andre Coley and Darren Sammy, what was your initial reaction to these announcements?
I think dealing with Andre Coley first, I think the best way to explain it for Andre Coley is he's paid his dues. Now, whether people want to say that means he should or shouldn't have got the head coach job, and obviously that's for the Red Bull version of the West Indies cricket team, that's up for other people to debate. But what can't be denied is that the man hasn't paid his dues across all aspects of regional cricket, whether home in Jamaica, for the Windward Islands, the Talawas, whatever the Scorpions, whatever it might be. You talk about developmental cricket. You talk about the development of cricket across the region, and people will mention Andre Coley's name. So if we're gonna say that the West Indies head coach job should first and foremost be considered for somebody of West Indian or Caribbean heritage, then it's hard to argue that Coley doesn't have the credentials to do it. And obviously he had his interim stint earlier this year, one in Zimbabwe, lost the Test series in South Africa, but then obviously drew the ODI series, won the T20 series, which was significant given our record in South Africa in general. I think he deserves a chance. So Coley, no problem with. And again, it's also worth reminding people that with the red ball job, that is essentially, because we don't play as much Test cricket as we used to, it's important that people remember that the red ball job is as much about A-team cricket, developmental cricket, age group cricket, academy cricket. So Coley's remit isn't just to lead the senior men's side. It's to lead on development and join the dots together across the region in general. So it's a massive job that he's undertaking. So well done to Andre Coley. In terms of Sammy, it's an even bigger job for Darren Sammy. I think obviously there's a lot of discussion about it. Some people say good choice. Some people are like, what are his credentials? He doesn't currently have the level 3 qualification that you would think should be the minimum requisite for somebody to take a West Indies head coach job. But I made an analogy on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast with Santoki the other day, and I'm going to use it because I know you're a Manchester United fan. What we don't know with Sammy is if this is like a Ole Gunnar Solskjaer type appointment, where it's a former legend of West Indies cricket. And some people will say he's not a legend, whatever. He's a 2-time World Cup winning captain, so he qualifies for legend in that context, right? And what we don't know is sometimes when you have a returning quote-unquote hero coming back to a sports team, that can go one of two ways. It can either galvanize the team because, as we say, it's a former captain who led the West Indies T20 team in adversity, unexpected victories on both occasions, and brought so much joy back to the region and so on and so forth. Will that uplift this generation? Will they look up to someone like a Sammy leading them who understands the kind of modern day dynamics of how T20 works? Hopefully so. Or does he run the risk of potentially tarnishing his legacy by having to take on what is one of the hardest jobs in world cricket? I'm happy for him to get the chance. I think at this stage of West Indies cricket, it feels like a Hail Mary pass, but it's worth taking the gamble. I think in T20, the bigger question mark, and I'm sure what we're going to get onto, is the ODI job. Whereas you can make the argument to say, oh yeah, Sammy, you can see why he'd get the T20 job and his legacy and this, that, and the other. That legacy doesn't extend to ODI cricket. So that's a harder job. And the other reason why it's a harder job is we have been terrible in ODI cricket for what feels like we're coming up to nearly 10 years of struggle, if not more, in ODI cricket. So it's a very hard job in that format. And what's worse, Simon, is he's got no breathing space because his first engagement is the World Cup qualifiers. so in some ways, Simon, you have to say we should applaud him for wanting to take on the job, because the first thing he's got to do is the hardest thing of them all, and that's get the West Indies out of the World Cup qualifiers. So straight into the fire, so to speak. And we'll see what gets on.
Yeah, baptism of fire, as you said, literally 3 ODIs against the UAE and then bam, straight to Zimbabwe. So yeah, you're right, in terms of that standpoint. And, you spoke about the success that Sammy has, in terms of the T20. He's only one of 3 players that have won trophies for the West Indies in this, you could say, millennium. Chris Gale, Dwayne Bravo and Darren Sammy, because those 3 are the only players that won the Champions Trophy 2004. And also the 2 T20 World Cups as well. So yes, the success. Great analogy with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And you're right, it could go 2 different ways. When you're in the Caribbean mesh, and I'm sure maybe you could tell about the Caribbean diaspora in the UK as well, everybody is, when they think Darren Sammy, they think positive, upbuilding. You mentioned the point about credentials, but people feel when they think Darren Sammy, they think somebody that is enthusiastic, somebody that is willing to work. And while maybe performances might have not reflected that every single time he's worn the maroon colors, there's always been that sense of Darren Sammy's a good guy sort of vibe for him all the time from that sort of standpoint. But in terms of, you spoke about his appointment. To the best of your knowledge, were you aware of a candidate that was close in the running to Sammy for the white ball contract, or that was in contention as well? We've heard Mickey Arthur and others in the past, but was there one specifically that could have said, there's a shout there, for him?
Yeah, so The hard thing is they've obviously gone with 2 West Indians, and again, people can decide whether they like that or don't like that, right? Dr. Kishore Shallow, the new Cricket West Indies president, stated that there were applicants from overseas. We don't know, and I'll do some digging, but we don't know any official names of who applied from overseas. And again, not too dissimilar to thinking about the Reggae Boys. We dispense with Whitmore, and when we went with another big appointment, we went with Halgrimson, right? And there would have been arguments then about, is it right to go overseas? Should it be a Jamaican? This, that. Okay. As I understand it, 2 people who I definitely know applied were Shivnarayan Chandapur and Otis Gibson. I've been led to believe very strongly that Shiv 100%, Otis I'm 99% sure applied as well. Now, obviously, Otis Gibson led the West Indies previously, I think between 2014 to 2016. It might be 2013, 2016. Correct me if I'm wrong, people, or 2012 to 2015. But he's led them previously. And actually, Sammy was captain when Otis Gibson was previously the head coach. The Shivnarayan Chandapur one, though, is interesting because he definitely applied. And in the press conference, Dr. Kishore Shallow admitted that Shivnarayan came close to getting the job. Now, here's the thing. We know why Sammy would have got it in terms of the credentials, the motivation, the man management skills that he can bring to the job. But the Talawars won CPL. The Talawars won the last CPL, and Shiv was the head coach of that side alongside Curtly Ambrose and Andre Coley. So I'm just intrigued. What was it that put Sammy in the driving seat over Shiv for the white ball job when Shiv could point to Talawars last year and go, but I won CPL just last year. I can't answer that one, Simon. I'm just saying that's an intriguing context to put into this debate and argument.
Fair. I understand. Very much so. I can understand that in that situation. And there might be a situation where there was a phase 2 of the interview process, or a situation where that cutting edge in terms of what Sammy did as a player and what he did to the unit helped. There are many conversations, as you know, when Shiv was a player, about communication, sometimes introverted, or was he open to the media in that sort of standpoint, because his responses were sometimes 1-word, 2-word responses from that sort of standpoint. So I get what you're saying from that sort of standpoint. But Mash, it is, to be quite frank, quite disappointing when you bear in mind 4 decades ago we were champions of the world, and 4 decades later we have to qualify for a tournament that we're normally in every 4 years. And yes, this is not the first time, because we're in Zimbabwe 5 years ago. But now we are here again. Now, from that situation, seeing the ICC Super League and the matches that we had, do we deserve to be where we are?
100%. 100%. And for me, this goes back a long time. So let me put the cat amongst the pigeons. I'm going to go all the way back to 2014. So we're talking 9 years now. And I'm not saying we're in the World Cup qualifiers because of what happened in 2014, but I am saying that the rot has been there for a while. Now, just to cast people's minds back, in 2014, people may or may not remember that West Indies went on tour to India. It was the very famous tour where it was called off. Breakdown in communication between what was, effectively Weeper, the then Cricket West Indies led by Dave Cameron, the players. The captain at the time was Dwayne Bravo. Sorry. The captain at the time was Dwayne Bravo. And long story short, the series, I think, was 2-1 to India at the time. By the time of the 4th ODI, the players said they're not taken to the field. Tour was called off. Bravo was sacked as ODI captain. At that point in time, in modern West Indies history, he was the best ODI captain that the West Indies had in terms of modern ODI cricket. Bravo was sacked. Pollard was told he was persona non grata. I think Gale went to the World Cup, but then was essentially removed after that as well. And what effectively happened from that point onwards is between 2015 and 2019, the West Indies did not win an ODI series anywhere in the world, not at home, not away, against anybody. So when people say to me, why are we in this situation? I think it goes all the way back to them. We went through a 4-year stretch under Jason Holder's captaincy, and I'm not saying it's Jason's fault. I'm just saying that's who was captain, of not winning any series. And that led to, as you correctly pointed out, Simon, us having to qualify for the 2019 World Cup. And what's happened since 2019 is we turned to Pollard as captain, and we did actually see a bit of we saw an improvement. We saw the Pollard as captain and Phil Simmons as head coach. We saw an initial improvement, and this is what I think has kind of turned things for the West Indies. When the pandemic came, West Indies, I think, suffered more than any of the full member nations, or like what we see as the traditional full member nations. And the reason why I say that is because there was no cricket anywhere in the Caribbean. No domestic cricket in terms of on the individual islands or countries, and no regional cricket in terms of intra-competitions. So effectively for 2 years, cricket went on lockdown in the Caribbean. And I think that has added to the failures that has happened in ODI cricket. Obviously, Pollard has now stepped down as well. And actually, Simon, to give an example of that pandemic effect, people may remember that when we went to Bangladesh, I think at the start of 2021, about 12 of the senior players refused to tour because of their fears over the pandemic. They were told by Cricket West Indies, you don't have to tour if you don't want to. And 12 of them, who we would consider starters in our main squad, said, we're not going. And we took what effectively was, with no disrespect to the players that went, we took what effectively was a B/C team to Bangladesh and lost 3-0. Now, that series, Simon, was part of the ODI Super League. So you look back in hindsight now and go, well, boy, we lost 30 points there just by sending a weakened side to Bangladesh. So do we deserve to be where we are? Yes. But is it as simplistic as we're just terrible? No, there are some extenuating factors and circumstances which have played into this.
Yeah, Mash, and you're privy to what's been happening on the island of Jamaica and across the region as a whole. You know, in the period of COVID, the Caribbean was very ultra with the treatment towards it, when you could leave your house, and many, many other things as when you could travel. Versus in England, come June, we had that England series against the West Indies, and the Premier League resuming. So the European approach, the North American approach was very, look, sports is a business and an industry. We need to get cracking. People need to get paid. Versus the Caribbean, which was very 2021, late 2021, where things started to get back up on the feet in a sense. So you've hit the nail on the head there, and I really appreciate you bringing up that point, and hopefully other viewers can be able to meditate on that as well, because it's so important, because it's not just in cricket, but other sporting disciplines as well, such as a late stage as well. And when you're seeing persons coming back to regional cricket and you're seeing them 1 or 2 stone heavier, you know, what does that tell you as well in the grand scheme of things? So well said in terms of, you know, where we are today from that sort of standpoint. It is where we are, and in relation to what is happening, especially in another month from now, the qualifiers. So we know about Ireland, we know about the Netherlands, Sri Lanka are there, Zimbabwe, Nepal, Oman, Scotland, the UAE, and the United States. But quite cutthroat, as you're aware, quite mashed, because of the 10 teams, it's only the top 2. So, but, you know, the qualifiers, well, the T20 World Cup last year in Australia, many would have thought it would have easily, by a canter, finished in the top 2, but it didn't really pan out in that sort of way. So the ODI standpoint, we're still having that dot ball percentage in the 48 to 50% sort of region, 150 dot balls a game. It's a concern when you bear in mind even associate members have a decent rotation of the strike mentality, formula, tactic. So
most definitely. And I think that you bringing up the dot ball percentage is yet another example of why we haven't been able to crack the ODI format, and why I think this is a long running problem. It's almost become like a running joke, like you know what you're going to see with in terms of our dot ball percentage. And I think what's changed is we just don't have as many explosive players as we once had. So in the past, more so with T20 cricket, we could overcome the dot ball percentage. 50 over cricket has proved harder for the West Indian players, simply because I think they're caught between a rock and a hard place. So take a Rodman Powell. I think Rodman Powell's a perfect example to articulate this point. Until last year's Super 50 for the Scorpions, which of course Powell led the side to victory, you could argue that for someone like Rodman, he's never quite cracked how to play 50 over cricket. We know his power game. We know what he can do in the shortest format of the game. But constructing a long innings without needing to always resort to the power game it's always been inconsistent for Rodman, which is why he's been in and out of the West Indies 50 over side. For the first time in a long time, which was the Scorpions' victory last year, we saw Rodman, and in fact, he ended up as top scorer in the competition. We saw Rodman construct what I call 50 over innings, right? So a lot of the West Indies' success or lack thereof, first and foremost, hinges on how many of our players can construct 50 over innings. We know Shai Hope can. He doesn't need any introduction. His ODI record speaks for itself. But of the Shamar Brooks, the Rodman Powells, and Nicholas Purans, Brandon King, who may or may not be in that side, Carl Mayers, etc., can they? It's about identifying roles and everybody play into a 50 over game. And then on the flip side past that, which is my biggest concern, can we take wickets? Can we restrict runs in the 50 over format? We've seen the squad that's been announced, and there's some question marks about it. And I just worry about our wicket taking ability and run restricting ability. I'm not so much worried about the batting, but I am definitely worried about our ability to restrict.
And the burning, you could say, question amongst Caribbean fans, Mash, and I'm sure you get it as well within the United Kingdom, has always been, maybe a decade ago, we had the conversation about where is Sunil Narayan. But right now, the conversation is, where is Shimron Hetmyer? What is happening? Private life, whatever might be happening at home or personally, we've heard different things. But Shimron Hetmyer is one that has polarized opinion here on the island and in the islands, and I'm sure as well within the Caribbean diaspora in the UK as well.
I really don't know where to start with this young man. So the facts are now, since Shimron Hetmyer debuted for the West Indies in what I would call a blaze of glory, it's easy to forget that Shimron Hetmyer has 5 ODI centuries because they were so long ago. They were so long ago. We've barely. I was saying to the co-host of the Caribbean podcast, I'm talking Egilendran. I was saying to him the other day, it feels like we haven't seen Shimron play properly for the West Indies now for what it feels like almost 3 years that we haven't seen this guy play consistently for the West Indies. In, out, fails fitness test, in, out, fails fitness test, fail fitness test. Don't get on a plane. Don't get on a plane. No World Cup. I'm sure there's been players like him. If we go through the West Indies archives, we can find players who have had similarly disruptive kind of histories with regards to West Indies cricket. I think the thing that sticks in people's kind of throat with Shimron is that the number of times it happens. And there comes a point with any cricketer where you have to look at the situation and say, how many times are we going to go through this? How many times are we going to have the same kind of conversations? Now, obviously, after the T20 World Cup, when he didn't get on the plane and there was a big furore about it, an independent report was commissioned, and that independent report basically said that it recommended to Cricket West Indies selectors or Cricket West Indies in general that it's important to sit down with Shimron Hetmyer, as well as a few other players, probably like an Evan Lewis, and work out where your head's at. What do you need to bring you into the fold? As I understand it, at the time of us recording this, Shimron and Jimmy Adams have had a conversation. Shimron has indicated to Jimmy Adams that he is available. Based on the social media tweets or messages from Shimron and people close to him, it appears that conversation with Jimmy was a good conversation, and it was one which suggested to Shimron, we're going to bring you back into the fold sooner rather than later. However, the selectors have made the decision that if Shimron is to come back into the fold, it will be later, not sooner, simply because, as they said in the press conference today, they do not want to disturb the current synergy of the ODI side, the same ODI side or white ball side that went to South Africa and didn't lose either white ball series. The question, therefore, Simon, is I'm putting it to you, but I'm putting it to everyone who's listening to this. Where do you stand on that? Me personally, I think Shimron should probably be part of squads going forward, but I understand the rationale to not include him yet. Just because, yes, you can say he's a world-class player or has the ability to be a world-class player, but, and this is where it gets a bit technical, Simon. By not including him, it's not a direct punishment, but it's it's not a direct punishment, but it's almost a subtle way of reminding him that he can't pick and choose when he will play for the West Indies. No one will ever come out and say this is a kind of punishment on Shimron Hetmyer. But I do suspect part of this is about, no, we'll pick you on our terms, not on your terms. I could be wrong. It just feels a bit like that as well.
Fair point. I get that completely. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of you're not being banished or shunned from the West Indies. And at the same time, all the power is not in your hands. I think you hit the nail on the head there from that sort of standpoint. And that's quite reasonable. So, I mean, we had a brief discussion in relation to the upcoming qualifiers, personnel with Shimron. Honestly, Machel, it would be great to have you in the Caribbean for the CPL this summer, because I'm sure whatever happens in the qualifiers, that's going to take the spotlight and attention will be towards. That will be a key indication of, okay, how we build towards the T20 World Cup, which will, of course, be in the Caribbean and, of course, America next year as well.
Most definitely. And it's interesting you mentioned CPL. So let me just put this to you, Simon, because I want to see a video on Sports City in the near future explaining why the Talawars have no games. Where is cricket in Jamaica, Simon? No Talawars games in Jamaica. So even though I'm going to be in Jamaica this summer, it's just as well I'm going before CPL because there's no games in Jamaica anyway to go and watch. So promise me you'll do a video looking at that aspect as well.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, and it's been a number of years, as you know, post-COVID, there hasn't been a game. CPL 2019 was the last time we had a game at Sabina Park. And as you remember, it's been less and less because there were some games in Florida in previous seasons, less at Sabina Park. The Minister of Sports, Minister Grange, have spoken about the commitment, but it really comes down to the financials. And you might say, but what about Guyana? Guyana financially not, like Jamaica, similar in terms of both. It's 200 Guyanese, dollars to £1. You know what I'm saying? Compared to like the same for Jamaica as well. So you can understand from that sort of standpoint. But definitely we can explore that moving forward. But you're right, Jamaica in terms of hosting sporting events, a massive, you could say, room for improvement, because there's some things, a reason why we haven't even had to host athletics world championships as yet. There's still some things that need to be fixed. The national stadium needs a proper media center end and an expansion in terms of the changing facilities, changing rooms. So there's some work to be done for sure. So that's the big thing. The national stadium, as you know, it was built by the British pre-independence, so it's not a modern stadium. It's not modern at all. So it also has some upgrades to be made if Jamaica is to host, for an example, an under-17 World Cup one day. Some massive steps would be needed. So again, priorities, my friend, and I think sports should be we should approach a stage in the Caribbean where sports is viewed as an industry and not a recreation, if you understand what I mean.
Yes. 100%. Well, I totally agree with you on that. But like you say, Simon, we as we ultimately kind of said at the jump, we wait with bated breath to see how in terms of the West Indies how these World Cup qualifiers are going to go.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll see for sure, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast on YouTube. Yes, a lot of the content you can find, especially on Twitter and online, but also the YouTube platform. Mash, you've been active with you and Santoki quite recently, and I admire that as well. A person can see you and also listen as well, so it's fantastic, brilliant. Keep up the great work, man.
Thank you very much, Simon. And of course, people, when you are listening to this, you would have seen that I would have posted this on all of our socials, all the Caribbean Cricket Podcast socials. So make sure after you've watch this, that you press like. If you haven't already done so, press subscribe and make sure you follow everything that Simon Preston does on Sports City, people.
Appreciate that much. Just before we go, anything that you have working on perhaps before the end of the month, anything that you're looking forward to, a squad preview for the qualifiers, perhaps we can look out for, anything we can look out for?
Yeah, I think I think we're going to delve into this Shimron situation a bit more. It's kind of the talk of the town at the moment. And then I guess, like you kind of said at the top, in terms of, in general, though, in terms of West Indies cricket, there's so much on the horizon. We've got the tour of the US. In fact, the A team, is currently in Bangladesh. Their first unofficial test match, I think, begins tomorrow, on the 16th, I should say, in Bangladesh. You've got the women's team have a home series against Ireland, which I believe begins next month. You've got, of course, the men's team going to the UAE. You've then got the World Cup qualifiers. And then once that's all, then India come to the Caribbean for a men's series. And then straight after that into CPL. So the cricket can't stop, Simon. It's 24/7.
24/7. Yeah, and guess what? This time next year, Mash, you're going to be in Sabina Park watching the West Indies in a World Cup. Put it that way. Very
true. Very, very true, But let's try and get to one World Cup first before we have to think about that one.
Love that. One step at a time, Mash, thanks for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Let's stay in touch, and I'm sure, especially with the busy calendar that lies at the qualifiers, and especially on football side of things, we'll be in touch for sure. So keep up the great work, and we'll be in touch.
No worries.
Okay, Mash, take it easy, man. So there we go, guys. Machel turn. If you guys haven't already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and also subscribe to Caribbean Cricket Podcast on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, everything related to cricket. Check out the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. And there's also some merchandise as well. And Mash will provide all the merchandise that you need.